Interesting. Well, with high school quarterbacks, there's a separate interesting phenomenon going on, which is the spread and the fact that the spread is now being increasingly used at the high school level, particularly in Texas, and that the level of coaching skill is so much higher in certain high schools than others. So you have a kind of professionalization of the level of particularly offensive coaching going on in certain parts of the country. That's giving those kids such an enormous advantage that I think you could make a reliable. I mean, if I was a college coach, I would identify those players who came from high schools that had the spread in place and had a full-time, I always look for I look for the professional high school franchises, and I would get my players from there. There's such an incredible advantage to, remember Chase Daniel, who went to the same high school as in Texas as Drew Brees? No, some other famous quarterback, I've forgotten. There's a high school where basically it's like a run like outside of Dallas, I think. That's run like where all these great quarterbacks have come because they're getting there at 14 and 15 and they're learning these incredibly complex offenses and then running the same offenses when they get into the college ranks. And that's Chase Daniel had been in the same offense by the time he graduated from Missouri for 8 years. Right? There's no way you can compete with that if you're coming into an offense cold as a sophomore in college. So that's what I would look for if I was a college coach. Sure.
Hey, so it sounds like your passion for football is matched by a lot of people in this room. With reference to your Michael Vick article in the New Yorker, do you really see yourself pulling away from the sport over the next generation as like evidence of the kind of trauma that's happening to football players becomes more evident?
Yeah, I feel quite confident in saying that it isn't just me, you too. We won't be watching football 20 years from now. We'll have moved on. It'll become indefensible. I feel about football, I say the same way I feel about eating meat. I happily do it now, I won't be doing it. But, there's two arguments I would make. In the 20s, everyone in this room would be a huge boxing fan. We are not anymore. In large part because the sport is morally indefensible, right? We are 5 years away from having an accurate measure of just how many ex-NFL players are permanently cognitively crippled by their years of playing. How can you continue, first of all, as a fan, to go and watch a game that is essentially, to be complicit in that degree of that's point number one. Point number two is, I think the other more important thing is, we are very, very close to the point where parents aren't going to let their kids play football. That's, to me, the much more important. I mean, think about it. We are now, in the last 10 years, we have gotten to the point where every single parent from the lower middle class up, when their child is an infant, they strap them into the backseat of the car in $300 car seats to protect against the 1 in a million chance that they might get into a serious accident, right? That is how much we have elevated our kind of concern over the potential risk to our children. Are you going to try to tell me that same parent, right, who is so insanely, paranoidly obsessed with children's safety, will turn around and let their child play a sport in which their beloved kid gets whacked in the head at impacts of 60 to 150 Gs 1,000 times in a season? That's crazy. Absolutely nuts. Somebody told me that at a college that I won't name, an elite college I won't name, a neuroscientist is being prepared for publication. There's several kinds of MRIs you can do, and there's one kind that's really, 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 really fine-grained. Did a fine-grained MRI on a random sample of asymptomatic college football players at this institution, a highly elite institution, and just found, things that shouldn't be there, right? And these are kids who are in the 95th percentile academically, who are paying $50,000 a year for their tuition, who are supposed to go on and be the elite and who are 18 years old. Right? There's just no way.
Why can't you stop watching now?
Because I love it. I'll be honest. I mean, it is becoming an increasingly guilty pleasure, and it's not just me saying this. We will all have to face up to this problem really soon.
Which team do you think will win the Super Bowl?
I'm cheering for the Saints.
Do you think the problem with selection of quarterbacks is fundamentally intractable, or do you think that maybe there's some stats that people haven't thought of yet? I mean, I think of like George Mason, which is a university that realized from a recruiting perspective they couldn't get the tallest basketball players, they couldn't get the most athletic, and they were able to kind of find a niche where eventually they got a team that went to the Final Four, and 6-meter school to kind of teams. So I'm just wondering, is it possible that there are just some things we haven't figured out yet about what makes it?
There is always, this is the hope that keeps tons and tons and tons of consulting companies alive, right in the middle of this will-o'-the-wisp thing that if you just buy my tests, right, this is what every year there's a new version. This is why they originally had the Wonderlic, right? The Wonderlic was supposed to be the thing, the notion, all we have to do is test their IQs, right? And then what do we know? We know that there's very close to a zero correlation between, in fact, the 7 dumbest quarterbacks of all time are in every way superior to the 7 smartest. The smart Drew Henson had one of the highest scores ever on the Wonderlic. Drew Henson. Meanwhile, Terry Bradshaw had one of the lowest. Who do you want? And then there was people who do that brain typing, and then it's quackery. People refuse to accept the fact that this is just a fundamental human principle that at the top of the distribution, all of these kinds of predictive measures are useless, right? It's the same game that's played in the nursery schools of the Upper East Side, right? They pretend that they can discern a difference between these kids at 4 years old. It's nonsense, right? It's also nonsense, by the way, when Harvard says it can take a pool of 10,000 pre-selected kids, each one of whom is in the 99th percentile academically and socially and what have you, and say that this 1,000 belongs at Harvard and this 9,000 doesn't. That's just nonsense, right? They might as well just throw, darts at the applications. We're constantly playing this game in a society, and it's just all false. At a certain point, we have to. I'm a huge believer in the value of lotteries. I think that most selection problems are more fairly dealt with through a limited lottery. That is to say, you establish a cutoff, and then you throw the dice. In fact, I would love to see NFL teams start using make a distinction between the top half of players in the draft and the bottom half, and then just put them all in a hat. Sure.